are mild or moderate and get better within a matter of few days. We particularly looked at myocarditis and pericarditis, which are inflammatory conditions affecting the heart. Very rare cases have occurred in adolescents and adults after vaccination with messenger RNA vaccines. Data from large vaccination campaigns indicate that the frequency of these side effects in younger children is significantly lower than in adolescents and adults. I would also like to touch upon COVID-19 vaccination and pregnancy. We know this is an area where the information provided to women was initially limited, since pregnant women were not typically included in the clinical trials which led to the approval of the vaccines. However, now further data is now available on the safety and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccine during pregnancy. EMA COVID-19 Task Force, the ETF, is therefore reviewing the results of several studies involving over 100,000 pregnancies at different stages. Current evidence on safety and effectiveness of messenger RNA vaccine used in pregnant women is very reassuring and indicating that COVID-19 vaccine reduced the risk of hospitalization or death during pregnancy without causing pregnancy complications or harming the unborn child. We have also requested companies to submit reviews of all available data on safety and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccine in pregnant and lactating women. Our scientific committee, the CHMP, will be discussing potential updates of the product information to provide up-to-date information to both pregnant women and to healthcare professionals. Pregnant women are more likely to get severely ill from COVID-19 when compared to those that are not pregnant. Those who get infected with COVID-19 during pregnancy are also at increased risk for preterm birth and stillbirth and might be at increased risk for other pregnancy complications. Vaccination is the best way to get both mother and child effectively protected and should be pursued as soon as possible. Before I conclude, I would like to give a short update on Paxlovid, an antiviral that can be taken orally by people who are at home, but might be a risk that the disease becomes worse. Following the start of the rolling review in the middle of December, EMA has now received a formal application for a marketing authorization for this antiviral. EMA will assess the benefits and risks of Paxlovid under a reduced timeline and could issue an opinion as soon as possible and within weeks. The surge of Omicron also has an impact on the authorized treatments against COVID-19. It is expected that many neutralizing antibodies will lose their efficacy against Omicron. Sotrovimab Xevudy appears to be the only EU-approved monoclonal antibody that can neutralize the new variant. Oral and intravenous antivirals such as Paxlovid and Remdesivir, the active substance of Veklury, maintain their efficacy against Omicron and can provide an additional tool to limit the burden of disease associated with this variant. I will stop here and give the floor back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cavalieri, for this comprehensive summary. I will now open the floor to questions from journalists. I see that the first hand that's up is from Maria Psara from EFSIN. Maria, we will unmute you and give you the floor to ask your question. Maria, please.
Hello, Happy New Year, and thank you for the floor. I have two questions, if I may. Greece has announced that the fourth dose of vaccine for the vulnerable will start from April. What is your comment on that? And do you think that a fourth dose will be needed for all the population? And if so, with the vaccines that already exist? And the second question is this. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said that we should evaluate the evolution of COVID-19 from a pandemic status toward an endemic status after the peak of Omicron. What is your opinion on that? When could we see the light at the end of the tunnel? Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I think these two questions go to Dr. Cavalieri. So please, the first question is on the fourth dose, the second booster. Dr. Cavalieri, please.
Yeah, as said in the introductory speech, we have not seen yet data with respect to a fourth dose. and we would like to see this data before we can make any recommendation. But at the same time, we are rather concerned about a strategy that entangles repeated vaccination within a short term. So this is something that should be part of an overarching strategy on what could be the best strategy for vaccination over time, making clear that we cannot really continuously give a booster dose every 3-4 months. Of course, when it comes to the vulnerable, and if you mean with that immunocompromised, that would be a bit of a different story. And indeed, for immunocompromised, it would be expected that indeed a 4th dose has been already considered since time from now.
Thanks, Dr. Cavalieri. And then could you please also talk about the second part of Maria's question about our path from a pandemic virus to an endemic virus?
Yeah, of course, we don't know, nobody knows exactly when we'll be at the end of the tunnel, but we will be there. And what is important and what we are seeing is that we are moving towards, indeed, the virus becoming more endemic. But I think we cannot say that we have already reached that status. So the virus is still behaving as a pandemic virus, and the Omicron emergence is clearly showing that. So we should not forget we are still in a pandemic. Nevertheless, with the increase of the immunity in the population and with Omicron, there will be a lot of natural immunity taking place on top of vaccination. We will be fastly moving towards a scenario that will be closer to endemicity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cavalieri. The next question is from Helen Collis from Politico. Helen, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Regarding the meeting that's taking place tomorrow with international medicines regulators, what specifically will you be seeking to decide together tomorrow? And with regards to discussing the next generation of vaccines and what they will be targeting and the potential variants, will that be a decision that the regulators reach, or will it be something that the World Health Organization has to decide, or how will that decision be reached? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. A very interesting question. Dr. Cavalieri, please.
Yeah, so first of all, tomorrow we will be looking at all the evidence that we have so far with the current vaccine, so the extent by which they are still providing vaccine effectiveness, and whether indeed we should still think that giving a booster shot at this point in time is the best strategy. But then the second part will be dedicated indeed on how to advance a potential variant vaccine, and of course Omicron, as said, will be the obvious candidate at this point in time, even if I believe it's still not yet certain that a pure Omicron variant vaccine will be the best strategy, particularly if we look at longer term throughout this year or the next. So it's important that there is a good discussion around the choice of the composition of the vaccine to make sure that indeed we have a strategy that is not just reactive after the virus changes, but try to anticipate what could be the next move and try to come up with an approach that will be suitable in order to prevent future variants that in any case will emerge. The other important point that we will be discussing is the design of the clinical studies that could be pivotal in order to come up with an approval of this variant vaccine, which of course will not be large studies, but will be looking at immunogenicity and essentially to define exactly what will be the study design for such trials. And maybe to add, because you mentioned on the decision of the switch, this indeed is something that ideally should be decided globally, so the entirety of the public health authorities throughout the world should decide together and converge on what is the best strategy, and we would expect that WHO here will play a critical role in driving the decision on such an important matter.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cavalieri. The next question is from Irini Sakadula. Irini, please.
Thanks for the floor. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Well, I would like to ask you, what is your message to anti-vaxxers who keep insisting that despite vaccines, everybody has the same treatment, let's say, from the virus, and lots of people get the virus. However, they get well soon. So what do you have to say to this regarding the fact that Omicron cases have gone through the roof? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irene, for this question. I give that to Marco Cavalieri. Marco, please.
Yeah, I think what is unfortunately very sad to see throughout these months is that the intensive care units and the hospitals are filled with people that got infected and were not vaccinated. So the vast majority of those who get severe COVID-19 and eventually die of COVID-19 are people who have not received the vaccine and could do so. This is really disheartening, and we will really encourage everybody to reconsider. It's never too late, and it's important that everybody takes advantage of the availability of vaccines and get vaccinated as soon as possible.
Thanks, Dr. Cavalieri, also for reinforcing this message again. So the next question comes from Angelo Di Mambro from ANSA. Angelo, please.
Yes, thanks. I have many problems of connection today, so be patient if this question has been replied already. Yesterday, the Pfizer had said that they can have an updated vaccine for Omicron by March. If this is considered to be necessary, how long it will take for EMA to eventually possibly approve the authorization of an updated vaccine? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Angelo. No, this question has not been asked yet, and this goes again to Dr. Cavalieri. Marco, please.
Yeah, so as we said already in the past, according to the new path that we defined already last year, if you remember, we issued a reflection paper on the requirement for approval of a variant vaccine. We estimate that it would take approximately 3-4 months to approve a new variant vaccine, which would mean that we would go into April at the very least, or maybe May, depending on the conduction of the clinical studies. So this could be the time frame for a potential approval of any variant vaccine. But as said, in terms of the switch of the manufacturing, this is a decision that is behind the EMA, and it would be very important, as said, that there is a global discussion around the best option here in the interest of public health.
Thank you, Dr. Cavalieri. The next question is from Donato Mancini from the Financial Times. Donato, please. Donato, can you hear us? So I don't think we can have Donato right now. Maybe he can come back later. So then I would go next to Victoria English from Mid News. Victoria, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'd like to return to something that Dr. Cavalieri said in his opening remarks, which was repeated vaccines, meaning, I believe he meant boosters, are not a sustainable long-term strategy. I'm trying to understand whether you're suggesting that we might develop resistance against too many boosters taken at a short interval. That's the first part of the question. And the second part is the real issue how to make a transition to a multivalent vaccine that could be administered just maybe once a year?
Thanks very much, Victoria. So 2 questions here. Question number 1 is on frequent boosters, and I give that to Dr. Cavalieri.
Yeah, indeed. There are 2 concerns here. Is that if we have a strategy in which we give boosters, let's say, every 4 months approximately, we will end up potentially having problem with the immune response. and the immune response may end up not being as good as we would like it to be. So we should be careful in not overloading the immune system with repeated immunization. And secondly, of course, there is the risk of fatiguing the population with the continuous administration of boosters. Now, as said, if the situation from an epidemiological perspective is such that it might be the best option on the table, then it can be done once or maybe twice. But it's not something that we can think should be repeated constantly. And it would be much better to start thinking about an administration of boosters that is more spaced in time. And ideally, if we want to move towards a scenario of endemicity, then such boosters should be synchronized with the arrival of the cold season in each of the hemispheres, similarly to what we're doing with the influenza vaccine. So now we will have to think about how we can transition from the current still pandemic setting to a more endemic setting in which this would be the desirable option.
Thank you, Dr. Cavalieri. So let's try again whether Donato Mancini can now ask his question. Donato, please, the floor is yours. Still doesn't seem to work. So then I go to Kristina Hudenko from Delvi from Latvia. Kristina, please.
Hello, and thank you for the possibility to ask the question. We received questions about the relationship between the level of antibodies in the blood and the degree of protection against COVID. At what level of antibodies does the booster need to be done urgently? And what level of antibodies might even be dangerous for booster vaccination if this level is too high? And the second question is about children. In Latvia, recommended period between vaccines for children from 5 till 11 years is 3 months. How protected are children during this long period?
Thank you very much, Kristina. So we have two questions here. One is on antibodies and boosters, and the other is on vaccines in children. Dr. Cavalieri, please.
Yeah, so we don't have a correlate of protection, so we don't have an exact amount of the antibodies that could be linked and translated into a certain level of protection from infection, symptomatic disease, or severe disease. Many efforts have been put in place, and what we know is that neutralizing antibodies do correlate with protection, but it's very difficult to find a threshold that would define who is protected from those who are not protected. So we have to be very careful in not overinterpreting the amount of circulating antibodies because it could be misleading. We are seeing at the individual level subjects also in clinical trials that had quite high level of neutralizing antibodies but still got infected, and vice versa, individuals with low level of neutralizing antibody that did not get COVID during the trials. So I think it's very difficult at this point in time to consider any strategy with respect to booster doses that would be linked to the level of circulating antibodies. With respect to your second question, children 5 to 11, I understand in Latvia they are giving the 2 doses with a 3 months interval. Did I get it right? Okay, yeah, so it's pretty clear that 1 dose confers some protection, but it's far from optimal, and you need to get the second dose in order to achieve an optimal protection. Spacing doses may be something that can be considered for a number of reasons, including minimizing the potential occurrence of adverse events, because it might reduce the chances that these are emerging. At the same time, we know that 2 doses of vaccines may provide some limited protection against Omicron, but still there is quite substantial protection from severe disease, and we would expect that this will be the same also in young children. So we look forward to getting more data with respect to effectiveness in young children to confirm if this is the case.
Thanks very much, Dr. Cavalieri. So the next question is from Marco Bresolin from La Stampa. Marco, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. The question is for Mr. Cavalieri. Do you have any evidence on the protection granted by the natural infection compared to the booster dose? And what is your advice for people who get infected after 2 doses, after being received 2 doses of vaccines? Should they get the booster doses, and when? Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Again, very interesting questions. Both go to Dr. Cavalieri. The first one is on natural infections versus boosters, and the second is advice to people who got infected after 2 doses. Marco, please.
Yeah, so this is an important topic, and we have been struggling with the evidence that we have around this. I think that all we have seen so far is showing that natural infection provides quite a decent level of protection from reinfection, but two things. First of all, we've seen that with Omicron, reinfection occurs quite frequently, and even more so than in vaccinated people. And secondly, what we've seen in a number of studies, including large effectiveness and real-world evidence data, is that getting vaccination after natural exposure, given what is so-called the hybrid immunity, is very beneficial for the immune system because it expands the breadth of coverage of both humoral and cellular immunity, and also importantly increases protection. All studies have shown that people who were naturally infected, when they receive also vaccination, the protection is increased. Your second point was related to the other scenario, the people that got vaccinated, that got infected, and what to do about the booster, if I understood you correctly. And here, indeed, we don't have many data in this respect. I don't think we see this as problematic from a safety perspective if they receive another booster dose. And this booster dose can be given also not too far away in time from the natural infection. In any case, it is pretty clear that from an immunological perspective, if you wait a bit longer, that will make your immune response more efficient. But it's very difficult to say exactly when the booster dose should be given. And of course, there are many other factors related to the operational aspect of the vaccination campaigns and the need to get optimal protection as soon as possible that will play a role here in the decisions that member states are taking.
Thank you, Dr. Cavalieri. We have the next question from Danny Kemp from AFP. Danny, please.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'm returning to the theme of endemicity, if I may. We saw some, you were saying earlier that, you know, with Omicron, we will be quickly moving towards a scenario that will be closer to endemicity. This morning we saw headlines from the WHO saying that half of Europe is going to get Omicron, which on the face of it looks really alarming, but you're saying that actually is not such a bad thing in a way, is that right? Thanks.
Thanks, Danny, and maybe Dr. Cavalieri can clarify.
No, yeah, I've not been saying that this is necessarily a good thing, because actually we're extremely concerned about the burden of disease that will be carried by the huge amount of cases that will be occurring now in the European Union with Omicron. And as said, even if severity might be lower, unfortunately, many individuals will get hospitalized. So we have to be prepared of the consequences of such a wave. At the same time, the fact that this virus is so transmissible, it means that a lot of people will get exposed, and many even asymptomatically, which means that this will confer a natural boosting to the immunity of all of us, which will be important for the sake of building this extra layer of immunity that could lead then to endemicity. So even if this is not necessarily good news, and I don't think it's good news, at the same time, we can think that after this wave has gone through Europe and other parts of the world, a lot of people would have been exposed to the virus and will have a strong immunity that will build then the way towards endemicity.
Thank you for this clarification, Dr. Cavalieri. And now we have a question from Virginie Bargouet from APM. Virginie, please.
Yes, hello. My question is related to AstraZeneca PrEP antibody, Evusheld. I would like to know if, to your knowledge, is this antibody is still active? Because it's still recommended in France. I'd like to know what you think about
it. Dr. Cavalieri, please.
Yeah, so as you know, this is a cocktail of two monoclonal antibodies that is currently under rolling review by the EMA, and we are looking carefully at all the emerging data, including its ability to cross-neutralize Omicron. And here we are seeing data that will show that there is anyway a reduction in the level of neutralization of this cocktail against Omicron. But it's very difficult for us to really have a clear view of whether this drop in neutralization then will lead to a decrease in efficacy. And that's why it's so important that, similarly to what we do with vaccines, we establish a good network across Europe and other parts of the world that is able really to determine if there are some decreases in the effectiveness of different therapeutic agents such as this one, so that we can really understand whether this drop in neutralization is really conferring a reduction in the efficacy. And we will be discussing more with the company around all the emerging data in this respect.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cavalieri. So I'll try yet another time to see if we can get Donato Mancini on.
Hey.
Donato?
Yes, you can hear me now.
Yes, perfect. Now we can hear you. The floor is yours for your questions.
Thank you for your patience and thank you for taking my question. Happy New Year. I have a couple. I'm sorry. What's the latest on molnupiravir? Are you going to approve it? Are you not going to approve it? We know that France has cancelled its order. Or do you know if any others have done that as well in Europe? On next generation vaccines, have you received any applications for nasal ones? Are you looking at rolling submissions for that? Would you prefer nasal vaccines, given they appear, theoretically at least, they would block infection better than intramuscular vaccines? And on Paxlovid, are you only looking at European supply chains or also extra-Europe supply chains? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donato. Quite a lot to unpack here. So 3 questions. One is on molnupiravir, one on nasal vaccines, and on Paxlovid. I think they will go to Dr. Cavalieri. So, Dr. Cavalieri, molnupiravir, please.
Yeah, I will try to be brief. Molnupiravir, we are going ahead with the review of all the data now that we received all the information with respect to the pivotal clinical trials, including the final analysis of such study. And it's still unclear by when exactly we will be concluding this process, but I would expect that is also a matter of weeks from now. So this is going ahead from our perspective. Your second question was about nasal vaccines. Of course, these are interesting type of constructs, and we know that conferring a high level of immunity in the mucosa is very important if we want really to stop not only severe disease and the spread of the virus deep into the lungs, but also if you want to stop the transmissibility of the virus and having really a big impact on infection. Unfortunately, these vaccines, which are in the pipeline, are still in the early phases of clinical development, so it's very early to predict by when any of these vaccines could be approvable or whether they will be able to show a level of immune response or protection that will be acceptable for approval. Your third question on Paxlovid, of course, we cannot talk too much about information that have been shared in confidence during the review of this product, but we will be looking at any manufacturing site that has been submitted by the company, and we will try to make sure if all these manufacturing sites will be approvable.
Thank you, Dr. Cavalieri. And now we have time for one more question, and that question comes from Tommaso Gallavotti from ADN Kronos. Tommaso, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you for the floor. Good afternoon, Tommaso Gallavotti, ADN Kronos News Agency. It's just a question about the compulsory vaccination, because some member states are moving towards compulsory vaccination. I know it's a political decision, but I wonder if you can tell us if you think that moving towards compulsory vaccination might accelerate the transition to an endemic scenario, since the hospitals are filled with unvaccinated people. Many thanks.
Thank you, Tommaso. Now, mandatory vaccinations are really outside of our remit. It's up to the member states to design the vaccination campaign. So I think on this one, we will really, we would recommend that you get in touch with the various national campaigns. But thank you nevertheless for a very interesting question. So that brings me to the end of this press briefing. Thanks to all of you for a set of really excellent questions, very lively, and for attending this press briefing. A big thank you to all our speakers and to everybody who has helped organising this session today. Our next press briefing on COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics will be held next week, and after that, we'll be back to our usual 2-week schedule for these briefings. As always, if any of you have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact the EMA press office. Thanks again and goodbye.